There. Maybe that did it because I had to click go live manually inside here. I guess probably because it wasn't linked.
Yes.
Probably
So
because it wasn't linked initially. For whatever unknown reason, OBS unlinked everything.
well, no. If you so when you set up a YouTube thing, there's a checkbox for auto start and auto stop. If auto start is not checked, you'll have to manually click go live.
I set auto start on both, but whatever. I don't know. I don't know, Dissenter. I have no
We're
idea.
live.
We're live.
We're live.
It's fine. People
Batman.
will show up if they show up. It's fine.
Brother Batman's in the house.
It's hey Batman, hey Dissenter. It's good to see you guys. So we're gonna see who else is gonna pop in tonight, and hang out for a little bit. So, like we always do before we really kind of move forward in anything, is to kind of check in with everybody and kind of see how each one of us has been doing this week and kind of what we've been doing. So, Mike, we're going to start off with you because I may go into a mild rant. What did you do?
Well, plus I'm the only other person here tonight. So
I know. We
by
discussed trying to get
default-
somebody in, but we always do these things last minute. That
No,
one we
it's
really
all
have
good.
planned out as the TurboGrafx one.
Well,
What's up,
and
Jerome?
you and I talked about this. You wrong. You and I talked about this. You and I are going to be able to cover Sega just fine.
Yeah, and I actually set up kind of I set up some images and stuff, and I spent some time doing that. Matter of fact, this background I set up last minute, mostly so we wouldn't get totally like distracted.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm turning
Okay,
off. By the way,
Galaxy's complaining about. He's got to be complaining about your green screen.
It's gotta
'cause
be
he
mine.
He doesn't have a green screen.
no,
he's-
don't. I'm using the Video Ninja digital background, and it sucks. So I'm turning it off.
Yeah, it's a little goofy. So
Yeah,
I will
it's
be the
not-
one with the digital background, which I originally did that mostly so we wouldn't have the weird downward spiral we had last week with
Yeah.
arguing about me looking either bigger than you or not having a background or all this other.
You know what?
kind
It's
of madness.
fine. It's look. This is a free service. This is a free service that some guy wrote. You can't complain about a free thing.
Oh, I can
Doesn't
complain
work,
plenty
doesn't
about it. It just doesn't really do a whole lot of good. So
Right.
what else you do this
All right.
weekend, Mike?
No.
Hi to
All
the
right,
10 in
so-
chat on Rumble. How you guys doing?
Going on, guys. I did the unthinkable this not this weekend, but on Friday. Peter and I played Fortnite.
I saw and I have watched so much Fortnite on Rumble that I can't bring myself to watch it anymore. Which
So,
is why
I
I
will
didn't tune
say-
in. I'm like I can't right now.
I will say as the playing side, because we got to play. We were playing with Relic and Planet Shan Shan.
I saw and
Um, Lovely lady Shan, Sister Shan. She's awesome. Played for 4 hours, and I'm not gonna lie. We liked it. It was fun. Like
I'm-
actually,
I'm,
fun.
I'm glad you had fun with it. I have not. But then you like Warzone, and I can't stand stuff like that.
this
So-
is not so. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna make an analogy to you because I thought about that. You know how they say Elden Ring is like Souls Light? It's like the most accessible Souls. You know, anybody who hates Souls games.
That's kind of a trigger
could-
subject for me right now, but continue.
So anybody who plays Soul or who hates Souls games is still gonna like Elden Ring. You know how that whole chestnut. I actually believe that about Fortnite. If you hate Warzone, Fortnite is much more accessible and takes itself so much less seriously.
I have tried. I tried it back when you had to build. So
Oh,
that's
no,
a
just
different
screw
that's
that.
a different level of the game, right?
Yes, that is. I will never play the building version of it. I am not a real estate agent. I am never going to play the build version of that game.
Well, part of the
Ever.
problem is I couldn't. I was so new I didn't understand the controls. That's problem one, and that just takes exposure, right? two, everybody was very good at it because people have been playing the game for years when I did this, right? When I jumped into it. So, you know.
Oh, so did
What's
we.
up, Boogie?
So I mean, so Boogie. Oh, Boogie's over on. Aha. Uh, Boogie, you sent me a Xbox message, but I was on my phone, so I got it late. Sorry, brother. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It was our first time playing, dude. We came in first 3 times in a row. We actually had four.
Honestly,
victories.
with Fortnite, if you have a coordinated team, it's much easier to go in and do something. You know what I mean? Particularly if you're used to playing with each other. Because adjusting to Fortnite, the guns look very similar to, like, if you're used to playing over the shoulder shooters with somebody else, you're probably going to adapt okay to how the guns feel in Fortnite. You know what I'm saying? It's a matter of map knowledge and things like that. And if you're not doing building, the map knowledge is a little bit less, right? That you have to have to be able to understand kind of what's going on. So I can kind of see that because you and Pete work really well together anyway, right?
Yeah, and well, he carries me. Let's be perfectly honest.
He carries everybody.
Although
he does a lot of online shooters.
He does, and he's good at it. Although I will say, in those first 3 victory royales we had, 2 of them I got the last kill. So I mean,
nice.
And that's the thing, is that I never felt like, why the hell am I playing this? And that, I think, is the difference. Like with Warzone, you'll hear me say, yeah, this is why I don't play these games. I never felt that with Fortnite. Even when we were going up against teams that were very, very good, I had a chance. And so it just was very enjoyable when we all had a good time.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's really kind of the big thing, right? Did everybody have a good time? So long as everybody had fun with it, that's fine. I haven't ventured into it because, one, I've played those games solo. I've tried playing them with randos. I didn't really dig it. So it wasn't for me at the time. But I might try it again if it was with you guys. I don't think I want to stream it. FP, thank you so much, man.
Brother FP, what's up, man?
But it wouldn't be the kind of thing I think I'd want to stream. Let me put it that way. If I played it, I'd probably want to play it with a group and then just play it with that group. Which kind of leads me into what I did this weekend, unless you got some more stuff that you got going on.
No, other than that, I played some more Dead Space Remake last night. I just did a pop-up stream last night. Just decided to, if ever I'm going to play something, I'm just going to fire up a stream, because if nothing else, I can talk to people that pop in and pop out. So I was like, you know what? I want to play some Dead Space. Fired up a stream, did some Dead Space, didn't even announce it, and had it. And so that was fun. So that was my week.
Yeah,
work was just hell.
I spent most of my week trying to get a video ready to go for this week, which is kind of why everything changed this week. You guys will notice you didn't see a moment in gaming history today, and you won't see an oddity on Wednesday. And I did that intentionally because I knew we were streaming tonight, and usually if I launch a video on the same day that I stream, one or the other suffers, and it's usually the new video. So that seemed like a bad time to drop that. So Rumble will probably get some more content this week for me than what YouTube will get, because I'm going to upload some of the stuff that's on YouTube onto here. That way you guys have that content. So more of that will be popping in this week, and I have 3 scripts ready to start working on. They're written up. I just haven't done any voiceover. So I spent some time doing that, and I finished up the Neo Geo video I had been wanting to work on, and that's kind of where my time went, was wrapping that up, because I wanted to get that done. I wanted to get that out to people. It's been way too long sitting around, as I've futzed around with doing streaming and working on other videos and things like that, and I'm like, I got to make this a priority. So I got that done by like Thursday or Friday, and then I spent the rest of the weekend, because you guys know I've been playing Demon's Souls. So I did some pretty hard pushing through that, and matter of fact, I finished it today. So I have officially beaten a Souls game. So I got good, I guess. I have mixed feelings on Souls, and it may be one of those that maybe that needs to be a different discussion with somebody who loves the game and then me who didn't really love it, to find out where we coincide and where we differ in the game. Maybe it's mechanical approach, maybe it's something else. So I was kind of a little on it by the time I finished it. I don't know if I'm going to do a watch party. It's only like a 15-minute video, so a watch party really isn't a... I mean, it'd be really short. Normally I just upload those and let you guys watch them at your leisure. So we'll see. And also I lowered my bandwidth rate in OBS at the suggestion of PandaSub 2000. So that may help a little bit with delay and stuttering, because he said if he goes over 8,000 kilobits per second that it causes him issues. So I dropped it deliberately below that this time before I went live to try to help with that. So
what did you drop it to?
7,500.
Perfect. I'm at least on Rumble looks crystal clear.
Yeah, and I haven't looked at it much on YouTube. I mean, I've got it up here on Rumble.
I've got both of them up just to see. Oh, maybe I don't anymore.
Okay, so Galaxy's saying he beat the original Demon Souls on PS3, and that's the only one he beat.
I never played that one. I
honestly, Demon Souls is kind of a weird game. And we'll go into it a little bit, and then we're going to get into our topic of Sega. I promise. We're not going to We're not going to derail most of the night.
No.
It's kind of a weird game, because when you first start it, it's brutally hard. And a lot of it is learning the mechanics, learning, like, you know, if you're going to parry, if you're going to have, like, a big shield and block, when you use one over the other, because there are two different types of shields. There's some that can do kind of like a forceful kind of ground pound style attack, and there's some that can parry. Parry shield is what I started with, because I started with a knight. And it's a good solid shield type to use, but it doesn't block certain attacks as well as certain other shield types, right? And so I didn't learn that till later as I started experimenting with other shields and other weapon options. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that's just not explained, like how you build weapons. What weapons are good to use, which ones work where. So there was a lot of me looking at wikis, trying to understand how this game works, and dinking around and experimenting with various different weapons, which that part I was fine with. That was okay. What kind of bugged me towards the end is, for being a hard game that's supposed to be built around these epic boss battles with these dynamic movesets and all this other stuff, while the bosses were hard to an extent. Most of them only beat me 3 or 4 times before I managed to down them, with the exception, I think, of Flame Lurker and maybe Maneater. And Maneater, I dropped out a couple times because I thought it was bugged, and then one time it really was bugged. He summons a doppelganger, and then you're fighting 2 of them, and I thought that was a glitch the first time I did it, and so I looked it up, and somebody said it was a glitch, and then I looked it up again, and somebody said, no, he summons a doppelganger, and then he fell off the bridge, and I couldn't find him, so I had to restart the fight. So that was a legitimate glitch that time. So those were the 2 that gave me the most problems. Everybody else was just really one note and kind of boring, but the problem is if almost any boss, if it hits you, can almost insta-kill you. So learning a pattern in this game is really frustrating.
Yeah,
because if you get hit, you're almost dead almost every time, or near death.
That always bugs the crap out of me.
So
that's why I don't play Souls games.
And that's the problem that I have with it. Now you can over level, and there's areas for you to do that, and I did that quite a bit. I think even by the time that the last boss drained a level from me, literally the last boss can drain levels from you. I still was over like level 80. It's for a first playthrough. Anybody that's played that game is probably laughing their head off at me right now because I was vastly over leveled. But part of it is I was annoyed at where my stats were at, and I wanted to shore up some stats. And part of it was I kept making new weapons, and when I made those weapons, I wouldn't have the stats I needed to wield the weapon, so I'd have to go build up those stats. So there was extra leveling involved to do those certain things. So it was kind of a weird experience. And my problem with it is the last 2 worlds were just kind of joyless, especially like the very last world was so soul-suckingly awful from a fun
Souls
perspective.
suckingly.
From
Just, you
from
know,
a
say that.
from a gameplay perspective, it was so unfun to move in because you're in like a big swamp, right? So you get poisoned, you'll randomly stumble, and you'll lose control of your character. There's a lot of stuff in that one that makes you lose control of your character. I hate that. And the whole area is nothing but that, with huge monsters that don't have that problem. So it was very, very, very slow moving stage. And I expected the bosses to be these epic, cool things. Two of them I one shot. Actually, all three I one shot. And the last one was laughable because all they did was talk to me while I hit him. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And it made me hate that last area. Actually made me hate the game more than anything else. So that's kind of where my weekend went. But it's beaten. I am now officially a Souls player of sorts. I had more fun playing Cuphead, and I thought Cuphead was actually harder than Demon Souls. Demon Souls just was more tedious to get through and took more time. It took me over 40 hours to beat Demon Souls. It took me less than 18 to beat Cuphead. And it does kind of seem to be made for people who like to suffer a bit.
Yes.
It really does seem to be designed that way.
Yes,
And
it is.
and
Yeah.
some of the stages were brilliant. Like the first world you walk into was amazing. It was a nice kind of castle location. The third area had this big dungeon thing with these mind flayers and all this lightning and stuff, and it was fantastic. Absolutely loved that world. The second one was kind of boring. It was a mine. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. The fourth one was kind of bad because it was a bunch of narrow areas and they spent a lot of time teaching you to dodge, and then you can dodge, and it was frustrating. The fifth one, you couldn't move, and then when you could move, you were in areas where you couldn't dodge. So it was also very annoying and frustrating that way, and kind of killed the joy I was starting to get out of the game as I was starting to kind of get into it. And it just took my vibe from going, this is cool. I'm starting to dig this. I'm glad I'm starting to like these games because there's so many of them. And they all look really pretty. I want to love these. And then it just came crashing down on like the last two worlds. And the last boss that I thought was going to be stuck on forever, as I started watching him, like his whole stage is just awful. But when I got to him, I'm like, he killed me a couple times, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what to do now. And it was almost like a big stamp on his forehead going, do this, dummy. And I'm like, okay. So like 4 fails, and I got this. No problem. So it honestly was not that bad to finish. The story was pretty nice. The ending part of the story, my biggest problem was they didn't give me enough story. Like they did a setup at one point after you beat like a boss. And then they don't tell you anything. I couldn't find any lore. Couldn't find anything. Until the very end where it gives me the wrap up. And the wrap up was nice. But I'm like, there's so many characters in here. I want to know why. Who are they? What were their motivations? What was going on? Who is this person? What's their background? Couldn't find anything. It was very frustrating. So I may do some digging to kind of understand more about the world because I wasn't getting it. But anyway, we've been going for a little bit. I think we're going to go ahead and move into our main topic, which is obviously Sega. Now,
Sega.
yeah, the lore of Dark Souls is endless, and that's okay. I would like more lore, and I would like it more prominent because I think it would drive me through the game. All the pain and suffering in the game and all the hardships on it and the difficulty level would be so much more fun if I knew what the hell I'm doing and who the hell these people are. The fact that I couldn't find any of that in there, even though I was looking for it, bugged me. You actually learn more of the characters in multiple playthroughs. You can't get the entire thing. See, that bugs me, man, because I don't want to do New Game Plus. Like, I don't want to play through this again. Like, at all. Well, see, Dissenter, in a game like this, I do. Because it's an RPG type thing. I want to know about these characters. Or have some way of finding it, right? What's up, Grumpy? Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, then give me some locations to go to it in my own period. But yeah, we're gonna dig into some Sega here, and we thought we would go over the history of Sega, and I thought we would kind of do this chronologically. and just kind of we'll talk about early Sega a little bit because it's very, very fuzzy how the company got started. Um, for those of you who don't know, some of you probably do know, and if you watched most of my videos on this, you probably already know this. Sega actually started as a company called Service Games. Service Games was based out of Hawaii and was an American company to start. Their main focus was to supply games and entertainment like various different little gambling machines and jukeboxes and things like that to servicemen overseas. So they had locations not only in Hawaii itself, they also had some in Japan. Now, they started running into some issues as legality of some of these gambling machines became a problem. And basically got kicked out of Japan. And what was kind of left of the company went through several different reorganizations in Japan, eventually becoming like Sega Industries, which was ultimately a combination of two different companies that I can't remember off the top of my head. If you look at my Master System video, it'll explain all that to you. And they started building their own arcade machines because they were trying to get as many arcade machines as they could get in there. They would break down all the time. So they got really good at repairing them and kind of making their own arcade machines. So that's how Sega basically got started in gaming, right? They started as an American company that basically kind of was a little too shady and got kicked out, and they got reorganized and rebuilt and re-envisioned as basically a Japanese company. So while it owes its origins to America, the Sega as we know it, like the real Sega, has always been basically a Japanese company. So they don't really tend to acknowledge their American half and involvement in the company.
Not anymore.
One, because they're Japanese, and two, because the way it got formed was very different. Right.
Good old David Rosen.
So, Mike, instead of me babbling all the time, interject anytime you
want
want
to.
to.
We're good. You're actually you are very much headed in that right direction. It's really wild. So Sega is. Before they really got sold off, or at least worked on selling off into Japan, it was interesting that.
No, I'm saying they're more xenophobic is more the word I would like to use. They are not good with they're not great with outsiders as a rule.
No, Tom Kalinske will tell you that in spades. Golf and Western Industries was the kind of the first name Sega, conglomerate that Sega sold to that actually got into the space. I don't know if people remember this, but they were the ones that licensed Frogger.
They licensed a bunch of games.
Yeah.
They had manufacturing rights even in the States for a ton of games.
Yep. And then in '82 is when they actually made their own first game, which of course was.
Oh God, I'm trying to remember the name of that game. It wasn't Astron Belt. That was their first FMV game.
Nope. Zaxxon was their first arcade game.
I didn't think it was 82. Zaxxon.
With isometric graphics. That was their first isometric game.
With isometric.
Their first game. I mean, their first game was Pongtron.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew Zaxxon was them. And that actually didn't even come. I don't even think that launched on. I don't even think that came out on the original Master System. The first time I played that, if it wasn't the arcade, which it likely wasn't because I think I was too young to be in the arcades without my parents at the time, it would have been on the ColecoVision because I had the ColecoVision copy.
That was the
which is a stellar version of that game. It's
amazing.
It's a good looking game even today.
It was amazing. It was.
Yeah, probably not Dissenter. You probably don't.
You would be living Ghost of Tsushima for real.
Yeah.
I kind of got
check
into
on the YouTube chat because I don't think I've seen anything come in.
Really?
Oh, there we go. Oh, there's
Okay.
Matthews. There we go.
Hey, Matthews.
Okay. I was about to say, it shows there's 5 people watching, but I'm like, wait a minute, where is everybody? I'm not seeing any chat. I wonder if Konami regretted the Frogger deal at all. And you know what? I bet at the time they didn't. Because I
Yeah,
don't think they were manufacturing at the time.
No, I don't think they were.
I don't think they were making arcade cabinets
Not really.
at that time. I mean, it was pretty early. You had like 2 or 3 big players in the arcade scene around that time. One of the major ones being Atari, and the other one being Sega, and then to a lesser extent Nintendo, who was starting to get into it around like the early '80s.
Yeah,
But
Taito was a big company.
Taito was another one that was really big around that time. They were really
that was
big,
Space
more
Invaders.
so in Japan than they were in the States. But they did have a couple of big hits, like I think Defender was theirs. I know Space Invaders was theirs. I can't remember if Galaga or Galaxium was them.
Galaxian was 1980.
I'm just trying to think of who actually.
Galaxian was Midway. No. Defender was Midway. Galaxian was
I was about to
Namco.
say- okay, I was about to say, Midway wasn't even like a thing at the time. I don't think. Not at the very not at the very beginning.
Yeah, Defender came out in 82. Galaxian was before that, and that was Namco.
Yeah. So a lot of these people weren't really manufacturing their own thing. Okay, Brian said he was watching in silence. That's fine, Brian. I just wasn't sure what was
What's
going
up,
on
brother
because
Brian?
what I was wondering is, was my YouTube chat popping in like I wanted it to? That was my concern. They see me watching. I'm lurking.
Watching.
So, but Sega doing their own arcade thing, eventually they were repairing so many of these, they just decided that they wanted to start making their own cabinets. And they were putting those in, I think they called them gun clubs at the time, because they weren't really bowling alleys. They were places for people to actually go shoot guns. And then eventually that morphed into more bowling alleys at the time. But bowling alleys weren't a big thing in Japan at the very start. And they started
gun
making
clubs were.
Yeah, don't ask me, man. It's
funny.
kind of it's kind of amazing.
That is amusing.
It was, did you have Rumble and YouTube chats on the same screen? I know. I'm very very happy to be able to do this now.
Yeah, Matthews, he's grown up.
I'm been working on it, man. It's been a bit of a struggle. Gonna lie. The struggle has been real. So as they started building more of this stuff in, they started making their own games. And then as they started making their own games, Nintendo started coming out with the Famicom.
Right.
So the Famicom did come out first. And Sega saw this, and they also noticed that their arcade business was fading. And so they were looking for new revenue streams at the time. And so somebody went, well, what can we do? And so the head of Sega at the time, whose name I can't remember, and if I could, I'd probably butcher it. I'm always watching from the back cave.
I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Nakayama. That was the head of Nintendo.
Have a good night, FP. Thanks for popping in, man.
Yeah, have a great night, brother FP.
So I could just between days, fond memories. The first time I ever completed was Earthbound Jim 2. 3 days of my dad almost killing my console. So one of the things that he suggested is
Nakayama.
Okay, there you go. One of the things he suggested, he's like, okay, well, we're getting really good at building these arcade cabinets. Why don't we try getting into the consoles? So that's when they actually started coming out with their first console.
SG-1000.
That would be the SG-1000. And I don't know...
Which came out on the same day in Japan as the Famicom. I'm
not really sure. Hold on, my display capture's still there. There we go. I didn't want that there. So this was Sega's first revision of their first console. Now what this did is this took carts on the very, very top, which I'm pointing at, and you guys probably can't even see me pointing at it. There are these small tombstones like cartridges, right, that this thing would take with a very, very simple controller. This thing almost looks Atari-like from the very get-go, which is weird because
almost looks like the 5200 controller.
It looks a little bit like a 5200 controller. and it's kind of weird. A nice cartoon porn. Thank you. Hey, I like that image of Jade, all right? Shut up. Leave me alone.
Let the man have his porn.
I've got another one of Katana that's not much better.
The internet is for porn. The internet is for porn.
Born.
Oh, shoot.
You getting called?
Yeah. My mother.
Oh! Do you need to take a moment? Not answering mom is usually a bad plan.
Hold on one sec.
Okay. That's my take on elevator music, guys. Sorry.
Keep talking about the SG-1000.
Okay. More into the human cosplay version. Those are good too. No problem there. So the SG-1000 was only really released in Japan. This was their first revision of the console. The hardware sold okay, but it wasn't the best revision of the hardware, and it had a few mechanical problems. So they moved from the SG-1000 to the Mark II. Now, the Mark II still took your base cartridges, but they also moved to more of like a button and a little bit of a... It was almost like a joystick design on top of a D-pad with two different buttons on it. Also shared the stream. I think that qualified for some kind of prize. A winner is you! I need to steal that from Panda so I can throw that up on the screen. Thank you for sharing, Matthews. I appreciate it. Now, this basically made some hardware revisions. The scrolling and everything like that was a little bit better. There's a little bit less slowdown. The hardware was just a little bit more refined. Now, this one also never made it to the States. This was their second revision of the hardware. The Famicom's still running on Rev 1. Keep that in mind. Okay? So they eventually moved from that version to this version.
The Mark III.
So already we have 3 revisions of Sega's hardware in 3 years. Or less than 3 years. It was like every 6 months to a year they were coming out with a new revision of this hardware. Now, if I had been a gamer around this time and you had revisions of this hardware, I would probably not be buying your console anymore. And the worst part about the Mark III is, you guys see that little slot-looking thing just above the gamepad plugins? One, the controllers would disconnect. The original revision, if you look at it closely, and I think even the Mark II, these things are wired. So when you're looking at the original ones, the controllers don't disconnect. Actually, the Mark I looks like they might disconnect, but I think in a lot of them they were hardwired. The Mark III lets you disconnect the controllers and plug them into the front, but you could also hook them onto the side of the console, which is a nice idea. Now, the Famicom, you couldn't take the controllers off at all. They were hardwired. Slot. And it's a nice looking console. The Mark III is actually a solid looking console.
Yeah, I wonder if they took their naming.
This thing took the original Tombstone style cartridges, and it also took what they called a My Sega card. And let me see if I can pull one of those up, because I've got an image of it that I just don't have edited in here. I'll try to add that in as we talk.
I always wondered if they named any of these things after anything Star Trek, because I don't know if people realize this, but the Mark IIIs were the names of the torpedoes that the Enterprise
yeah, that's true. It is. And I didn't really think about that. And I don't know if they were watching Star Trek at the time, honestly.
I don't know.
Let me see if I can find this here, because I could have swore I had a picture.
It's just kind of a weird thing to name it.
It is a strange thing to name it. Here we go.
Yep.
Let me see if I can get this on the screen. It's very hard to find these things and move them on the screen because I've got so much stuff on here. Oh my god.
Cards are crazy.
There we go.
I mean, to be fair, NEC was doing the same thing with their HU cards.
Well, this came up before the HU card, but yeah, this is basically reminds me of a HU card. And I'm not gonna leave this up long. It kind of looks like a mess. Carla, good to see you.
Carla, Sister Carla.
Maybe Japanese kids were easier on the controllers than American kids were. I got to imagine they are. But I think these cards are a cool idea. This is one of the things I always kind of liked about the TurboGrafx was the card slot thing. It seemed like a much tidier, neater way to have the cartridge, and it just kind of slides in and slides out. But he didn't like the little black carts. He thought they looked too much like tombstones and they weren't fun, so he wanted to come up with these. So this is what he came up to replace those with, and they didn't really come with any advantages other than it was a different form factor. So this is a very bizarre thing for them to have added in for weird random reasons that I don't quite understand, other than the fact that it looks cool and I like it. But the Mark III is eventually the one that got redesigned and migrated over to us as the Master System. So this is the original revision of the Master System. This is their original power-based console.
Go back to the Mark III for a second, because I'm gonna run with this. I'm gonna run with this Star Trek theory, and I'm gonna tell you why. Look at the font of the front and the top. That also looks like Star Trek's font. Computer TV game. That looks like a Star Trek style font.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. I'm trying to move some of these around so I can get back to it. Oh my god, it takes forever to get to there we go. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so people can see it. It starts to look a little fuzzy the bigger I actually get it, but you can here's what he's talking about with this. It looks a little bit like an old Star Trek font. A little bit. You kind of have to squint at it a little bit, but yeah, I can kind of see the resemblance in a way. I'm going to try to move some of these over here. Actually, that one can just go away. Get rid of that one. Move this back over. Oh, God. Everything got confused. This is the problem with using OBS, is everything will look really goofy for a bit. All right, let's go ahead and hide this one, bring this one out. There we go.
You know, I think people underestimate, too, that the SG-1000 by Sega's metric actually was for Sega.
It's definitely a skill issue, Dissenter, and it's also I've got too much crap on my screen. And when you start clicking on them, it doesn't let you highlight stuff and then immediately drag that
and
out.
I'm a sucker for exposed headers.
OBS is a little funky.
So Sega really put the SG-1000 out thinking it was going to sell nothing, but they put out a decent amount of games for it, and they sold 160,000 units, which is about 100,000 units more than they thought they were going to sell. So by the metric, this was a success for Sega.
Yeah, no,
the
entire Master System line, and actually each revision made the money, which is why they kept doing new revisions of it.
Yeah,
it's not like they were losing money on each one of these.
Right.
Now, Sega's lost plenty of money. We will get there.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, so but that is when, so the this came after David Rosen sold the company to Nakayama. So at this point, this is when Sega of Japan really kind of was born, and this is the first console that was put out as, quote, Sega Enterprises.
Yeah, and this was the first one that the United States got, period. And it's one of the reasons that if you look at the hardware specs and you look at the graphics in some of the games, depending on the game it is, some of the games Nintendo still did better. But by this time, Sega had a huge hardware advantage because they had done 3 revisions of their hardware, and they had upgraded the hardware specs every single time. So a lot of their sprite capability, a lot of their control capability, their movement, everything like that should technically be a lot better. It wasn't always executed appropriately in some of their games. Okay, Greyhound saying he got the Master System longer. The Genesis only had a few games. The console was way more memorable than the games for me, and I can see that because the console itself is kind of a talking piece. It's really impressive looking, and we're gonna get to the Sega CD. That's a big part of the thing. What's up, Charlie Hustle?
Charlie's in the house.
Sega.
My man just bought a
Mike,
bunch
tell us
of
about your
great
personal
import
Master
Saturn
System
games.
experience. I'm assuming it was your first Sega console. Yeah, I
No,
think
it was not.
you didn't actually have the Master System. I thought you did. I
It
know.
was not. My first Sega console was the Genesis.
Really?
I came back around to the
What's up,
Master
Vinny?
System later on, but, and I mean by later on, I mean like in the last few years.
Here's the
Oh,
Sonic
yeah.
City on the Master System. I'm
Well,
messing.
oh man, I need to open up the YouTube chat. I am sorry.
No,
Let
I'm
me get
just
the YouTube
catching
chat
up. I
open.
got behind.
Oh no, but
I got
I
behind on the chat, and so I'm trying to catch up to it a little bit.
oh
Because I
no,
was trying
I
to get pictures
actually
in, and I wasn't scrolling down, so it was causing me a problem.
because at the
The
time the
Genesis
Master System,
was actually my first Sega console as well.
the
I never could find a Master System in my area. Matter of fact, I never saw any advertisements for it. Never saw any commercials for it. And there was a reason for this because was the start of where Sega started to kind of hurt themselves.
I
Um,
was still playing. I was still a PC gamer at the time. That's why I didn't have a Master System.
that's
The,
right. You
the
had your Atari
Genesis.
800 and everything, didn't you?
Well, no, I was PC gaming.
Well, I mean, Atari 800 would be a PC.
None. Yes, but no, I was actually doing more. I had a at this time. I also had a Tandy, so I was playing like
Oh, okay, okay,
Tandy 1000 games and stuff like that.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, Matthew says his mind's blown. I thought you were Sega all the way back. What did you have for the Gen? And it seems like he was mostly PC at that time. See, I went from ColecoVision into NES, and then I had both the Genesis and the
Yeah,
Super Nintendo.
I went from ColecoVision to the Atari computer,
Gotcha.
and then from there, I stuck with the computer until because I went from the Atari, I went from an Atari 800 to an Atari 1200, and then when my Atari 1200 died, I had a Tandy 1000 EX, and then when I got into console gaming, it was the Genesis.
Gotcha.
And I
Okay.
wanted an NES, and my dad worked for a toy company, a toy store at the time, and he brought home a Genesis instead of a Nintendo Entertainment System, and that's how
Silence, peasant.
ah. So
Somebody
yeah,
had to say it.
Tandy, and it's hey, 3-channel sound, Matthews, 3-channel sound.
I do it all the time, Matthews. It's kind of brilliant.
Yeah,
Commodore 64 better than the NES for me. I never had a Commodore 64. I knew a lot of people that
I
talked
did
about
not
it.
either. I had a friend that had a
Um,
C64.
but right around the Master System, because Sega had been making like gangbusters all along on this, and I'm not going to say the Master System didn't make them money. It did, but this is where they started making their first major misstep because Nintendo started making deals with a lot of third-party companies around this time, and Sega was adamantly refusing to work with most of these companies. And the reason is because they considered them competitors and rivals in the arcade space. So they weren't treating the console like a console and trying to get the arcade games onto the console. They were trying to port their own arcade games to the console and keep the other arcade games off of it. So Nintendo was able to kind of swoop in and not only work with these people really well, but sign exclusivity agreements with them on top of that. And so by the time that the Master System launched in the United States, they had themselves, I want to say Mattel and Parker Brothers. And that was it. Those were the only three people that were making content for this console. So a lot of what you got was Sega's arcade games, which were amazing at the time. That they're you're not gonna hear me slight a lot of Sega's talent in the arcade. They've got a ton of it. So most of that is what was hitting the console, and it was
Yeah. Now
mostly
there
Sega's
is a
first party.
piece. Now there is a piece. So I watched the console wars on. It was actually on Netflix, so I got a
I
chance
haven't
to
gotten
watch
to
it.
that one. You mentioned it was
So
good and it had some other stuff on it.
yeah, the piece about Nintendo is very interesting because it wasn't just that they swooped in and made deals with people. Nintendo would not allow anybody to make content for any other platform but theirs, or Nintendo would not put it out on their platform.
Yeah, that
So
was
there
part
was
of
a
their
there was
exclusivity agreement.
yeah, it wasn't just, hey, we're going to do this deal with you. It was a requirement. You will not, or you won't put your stuff out on our system. And that was a big death knell
and
for,
it was a death kill for everybody, because Nintendo had by the time that Sega really started to kind of ramp up in the States, Nintendo had already launched their console with Rob the Robot, which helped them get into the toy space and make all these deals. Now, Sega licensed their marketing rights and everything like that to a company called Tonka. And yeah, like the Tonka.
Yep, that Tonka.
And Tonka had never worked electronics before. They had no experience in it whatsoever. They were hoping they would get their hooks in through them, through the toy line, much like Nintendo did. Nintendo kind of did this independently. They didn't have anybody pushing their stuff out. And Tonka did advertise it, but it was kind of a low advertising budget, because Tonka wasn't as massive of a company as a lot of the other companies that were out there at the time. Excuse me. So this caused them some problems with marketing and things like that. So they had multiple things that were causing them grief. In the end, the Master System, while it still made them a profit, it sold like 10 million units versus like 60 to 63 million NES units. So you can easily see why people wouldn't want to like break an exclusivity agreement with Nintendo. They just had the entire market share. Because they did a couple things very smart. One of the things they did is they had the Nintendo seal of approval, which was it was intended to prove that there was a guarantee that somebody had to quality check this would run on the system, and this met with Nintendo standards, right? Which coming out of the video game crisis that we had in '83, only in the United States, because they get called on all the time, only in the United States, meant that people were a little bit more assured of it, because the reason they even marketed it as a toy is because nobody wanted video game consoles at the time. They thought the market was dead. This was over with. Even arcades were going away, and that's why you had a big slump with arcades too. Oh, see, Mazin said he didn't know about the Master System until he found this community. The Master System did excellent in Brazil. Brazil's had two great love affairs with consoles. One was the Odyssey 2, which was just marketed as the Odyssey in Brazil because it was the only one that they had. They didn't get the first one. And they were huge into that console for like 10, 15 years. And the Master System was still selling units into like early 2000 in Brazil.
Yeah. They seem to like Xbox
the Master System
too.
there. Do what?
Yeah. They seem to like Xbox there as well.
They do. But one of the reasons it was so big in Brazil is Nintendo was slow to move into that market. Mm-hmm. And so they were shipping, then they weren't manufacturing them locally. Now, I don't know if there's anybody in here from Brazil, but they have a really, really, really heavy import tax. So it made their console super expensive. Sega was smart that they got in that market first, before Nintendo. They also did better in Europe than Nintendo, because Nintendo's name wasn't already known in Europe. But Sega was, because Europe was bigger on arcades. So they knew Sega more than they knew Nintendo. So they did better in both of those markets.
Right.
But in Brazil's case, they manufactured the consoles there, which made them cheaper. And also the Nintendo was getting, like, they were ripping off the console and making bootleg versions. By the time Nintendo got in there, they were cheaper than the official and could play the games. And so nobody wanted to pay the extra money.
Right. But the other thing, too, that people, need to remember, that whole... It wasn't just that Nintendo was locking down the third parties, but if you think about what Sega launched with versus what Nintendo launched with, I mean, are you going to buy a system that, even though it was graphically superior, are you going to buy a system for Hang On and Safari Hunt, or are you going to buy a system for Mario, for Super Mario Brothers?
Yeah.
There was such a disparity.
The thing that was happening that was funny between the two of them, and this is the first early instance that you see it. This gets worse in the 90s. and for the market as a whole, as far as how it changes. And my Neo Geo video touches on this a little bit too. But as consoles hit, the game space was starting to change. Arcade games were focused on you being able to play for 3 to 5 minutes and then having to put in having to pay again. So they were short, quick, bursty experiences, usually based off high scores. That's how Atari did it. That's how ColecoVision did it. But when the NES dropped, you had more memory, and they were trying to start to do things with overarching stories. Metroid is an example of that, with this kind of open world where they don't really necessarily tell you everything, but there's all this stuff to explore and this kind of overarching setup and then an endpoint with the game. Super Mario World's another one that was kind of like that. But big examples of this that basically use cutscenes. The first one that comes to my mind is Ninja Gaiden. At the end of each stage, you had a story clip that would tell you, hey, this is what's going on, right? And so that's where the game started to kind of change, because a lot of what Sega was doing didn't have anything like that. They couldn't do
it was still arcadey.
Like that.
It was still their arcadey stuff.
Right. And because that's what they had to lean on, and that's what they knew. And Nintendo was more scummy and corporate. I'm not going to disagree with that, but I love a lot of exclusive games that they have.
Well, don't forget that the licenses that the IPs that they owned were very well known. I always said I said in that in my Donkey Kong video that had Nintendo made the decision to launch the Famicom in the United States, ColecoVision would have been buried, because remember,
and they tried
Nintendo,
that because they tried to launch it as the AVS, which is the audiovisual system, is how they tried to launch it, and nobody bit. It looked too much. It looked too weird, and people didn't. The controllers weren't responsive, because they actually had IR blast controllers. They had wireless controllers on that thing to start, which didn't work that great at the time because the technology just wasn't there yet. Because you're using like infrared on the controllers, which happened several more times during the lifetime of the NES when people tried to make wireless controllers. There's multiple examples of that on the Nintendo system. But they never worked all that great.
Right. Had that happened, the landscape would have been very different. Sega may not have even broken into the U.S. market. I mean, it's all because it's not just Mario. If you think, and Metroid, they had Donkey Kong, and once they brought Donkey Kong back in house, I mean, that's another big IP.
Yeah. Well, and they were getting things like Joust. They were getting Balloon Fight. They were getting like all these other games. They were getting a lot of arcade ports.
They got Popeye.
Yeah.
Which
they got a version of Kung Fu Master called Kung Fu.
Kung Fu, right? They and as good as they were, Excite Bike, and I mean, there were a ton. No,
there's a huge legacy of Sega being the first at a lot of things in the arcade space. Astro Built is one of them. They were the very first Laserdisc based game, because Astro Built was one of the very first games to use an FMV background with pixelated graphics on the front to make a video game. They also were the first to make a holographic game, which was also a Laserdisc game, but the angle and the mirror that they used.
Time Bandits, right? Bandits.
Time Traveler, I think it's called.
Time Traveler or something like that. I remember that game.
That was the first, and as far as I know, only holographic game in existence. They were one of the very first to do that. So there's a lot of things that they did early and new. Pixelated graphics. They're really early into that. Matter of fact, I've got a video I'm working on that. That the first pixelated graphics, I think, was actually a game made by them called Fonz. Literally based off Fonzie from Happy Days. That was the first one that did sprite scaling, which was huge later on down the road in video games, not only for perspective in pixelated graphics, but in early 3D graphics as well, when it started getting popular. Now, it wasn't Pixelated graphics weren't used in the first 3D game. The other methods were used for that, but it was one of the things that made them really popular. I don't know who made Tron, actually. I don't remember who made Tron.
Tron was. Hold on. Midway.
Okay, Midway. There you go.
Valley Midway.
There's Hemp. What's up, Hemp? Hey,
Hemp,
Hemp, I finally beat Demon Souls. We'll have a chat about that later.
So when you look at, I mean that was a big issue when you the Master System launched 9 months later than the NES and only had 2 launch titles. Yeah. NES had 17. So by the time the thing launched, there was no getting a foothold.
No, they were too far behind in the United States. They didn't have the games. They didn't have any way of getting the games because Nintendo had already started locking everybody down. What's up, Show? Good to see you, man. So you just didn't have a way of making market penetration. Now, a lot of this would change when they moved to the 16-bit era and Tom Kalinske came into the picture.
Yep.
And that would be when we walked into the Genesis. Now, I know a lot of you guys always look at this and you always think, okay, Sonic. Well, that's not how this thing launched. It actually launched with an arcade title called Altered Beast, also by Sega, which is an amazing title. And if you haven't played it and you're a fan of the Genesis, I do recommend you go back and try it. It's a really good title.
It was amazing at the time going up against the NES.
Yeah, because the Genesis launched before the Super Nintendo. It came out in 89. Yes. Nintendo's still working on bringing out their Super NES, which won't come out till, I want to say, 91. So they had almost a 2-year lead. It was more like a year and a half or a year and a couple of months. And they did a good job of bringing some of these games out. Revenge of Shinobi was one of the very early games, and it had a lot of parallax scrolling. The music, the sprites, the colors used in these games. Man, my nose is itching like crazy. Were just huge for the time, and people adored these things. And it was a fantastic console. They also did a couple of smart things where they were trying to change the age group. The age group had been really young, like 8 to 12, for consoles since Nintendo had been dominant. Kalinske decided to basically shake that up. He wanted to make the age group older, somewhere between 14 to 25, to get interested into the console. So you started seeing a lot of advertisements of Sega does what Nintendo don't, Nintendo's a baby console, etc., etc., etc. I'm sure you've heard a lot.
Now that wasn't, and what's funny is that wasn't necessarily Kalinske. So that came from Michael Katz. Before Kalinske came on board, Nakayama had hired, because Michael Katz came from Atari, and he's the one who came up with Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Because remember, their initial
Scream was Kalinske.
That was Kalinske. But remember, at the time, what Katz came in and did was, he was like, we need big names to sell this console. So we got Michael Jackson, Joe Montana, Tommy Lasorda, Buster Douglas, who at the time...
Weird game.
Which one?
Moonwalker.
It was, but it was awesome. Because it had all the Michael Jackson stuff in it. I don't know that I'm going to
agree with you on awesome. I will go with you on
it was an awesome game. Everybody loved it. It was one of the highest selling games of that time because it had all of Michael Jackson. Remember where Michael Jackson was at that point. I mean, he was Smooth Criminal was number one hit. That was
Michael Jackson was a monster artist around that time. And he had Billie Jean, you had Bad, you had Thriller, you had like any number of hits from him, man. He was just killing the charts.
Smooth Criminal was the big hit at that time, and that's what the game was based on.
Matter of fact, fun fact, when Sonic came in, his shoes were based off Michael Jackson's shoes.
Yep.
From one of his album covers.
So when when they brought in Kalinsky and Michael Katz left,
I didn't even
that's
know
when
Moonwalker
you
had a movie. That's kind of amazing. I love that.
it had oh yeah, and it had a movie, an arcade game, and it was actually there was actually a ride at I think there was one at Hershey Park. They had a ride that was based on Moonwalker. It was crazy. Um, it was no Mega Man X. Shut up, Matthew.
I wondered if you catch that. It was better than
I
Bubsy.
saw it better than Bugsy. Good God. But the thing about it on the whole was getting those names, whether it was Michael Jackson and getting them into the commercials.
The
So it
portable. I
wasn't
didn't know
that
they
they
had a
just had
portable
the
Saturn.
names.
I'll have to
I did
look
see
into
that. But it wasn't just that they had the names. They got those guys to go into the commercials. That's what you had Joe Montana
Tommy
pointing to the
Lasorda was
camera
also in
going,
there.
Genesis does, Buster
Yeah.
Douglas, Genesis does.
Yep.
Michael Jackson, doing his thing, Genesis does. That was a big thing. And it just so happened that a lot of those games
Apparently,
were
I have to go
top-notch.
watch the Moonwalker movie.
It was crazy.
I'm truly terrified.
Well, you know what? It was on the same level, honestly, in production value as Thriller was. I mean, Michael Jackson at the time was making these mini movies out of his music videos.
Yes.
So
And a lot of his music videos in general told a story. Like Thriller told a story from beginning to end through the whole video.
Yep.
So he was one of the
and
first
had
ones
and
to
had
really kind of
Vincent
push
Price
that stuff.
and had Vincent Price at the end, which was classic.
Yeah.
So they went with star power. They had some great games. I mean, I still love Tommy Lasorda baseball. It was
and they
was
were
a fantastic.
one of the first ones to really do
Pat
licensed
Riley.
video games, licensed sports games, the right way. Like
Yep.
licensed sports games had been a thing before, and television had done that. They would have like NFL football. I mean, you had like Tecmo Bowl and stuff like that, but you didn't have them with the rosters like they were on the Genesis. You didn't have yearly installments with these rosters and things like that. You didn't have the big names attached to them like you did on the Genesis. And that was one of the things that started to draw more non-gamers into trying games out.
And where that started was Madden, because if you remember, and I don't know if you played the original set of Genesis games.
I did not play any sports games.
Okay.
I'm not a sports game guy.
So Lasorda baseball, Pat Riley basketball, and Joe Montana were not licensed games, so they did not have any real players or teams.
Gotcha. I know
So it
Madden,
didn't start.
I know Madden did, and then they had their own
Madden
line
did.
of like NBA X
the
and
2K series.
Yeah. That's where 2K got their start.
Yep.
And when you guys hear about 2K now, which is one of the names in sports games, they actually were started by Sega around this time.
Sega.
That was part of their Sega Sports line.
Yep. Sega put together Visual Concepts, and then sold off. They sold off their line
What's up,
to.
Oak City?
Hey, what's going on?
Technobolt.
They sold off their sign to 2K to Take-Two, who then made it into 2K Sports and 2K Games. But the original, and I always tell this story about I walked through the Sega booth during the first Dreamcast E3, and I saw NFL 2K playing on the big screen, and turned and watched this video for 10 minutes and missed part of my meeting with them, because I was mesmerized by what they did when they got on, because 2K started on the Dreamcast.
Right.
Because EA pulled out of, there was a battle between them and, Stolar. One of the big mistakes Stolar made, which we'll get into, basically telling EA, no, you're not going to be you're not going to be the exclusive sports games.
That was the Dreamcast era, and he actually had some pretty good reasons for that, I felt like.
Well, that it start yes, but it kind of rolled it. There's a Stolar. I have some good Stolar stories when we get there because I was starting my game journalism piece around that time, and I got a Victor Ireland Bernie Stolar story that is
Okay.
just
Yeah,
incredible.
I know a lot of your personal stories and your game journalism stories come in right around, I want to say,
A
Dreamcast.
Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Yep. So back at it's actually back end of the Saturn because I was getting into forums and IRC chats with developers and stuff back then, which got me into being a
I
game journalist.
appreciate that, Oak City.
So, nice.
I'm glad I can put you to sleep, sir.
There you go.
hey,
Um,
hey, whatever works, man. As long as you're enjoying the content, I don't care. The important thing
so,
is you're actually enjoying it. I love that.
so now the first, I think that so um, they had Madden, Sega on the Genesis, but Sega also continued to work their sports line, which is where we then get like the Genesis started the whole sports talk series, which is
Hmm.
how you got speech into into these games. I When I first played sports talk baseball, I was mesmerized, and then of course NFL sports talk football. Um, that was the next one in the list, and those games kind of really, I mean, they were helping between them and EA and um, getting back those third parties really shot Genesis, in the arm once Kalinsky came. Because believe it or not, at the beginning of this, Sega still didn't, they still weren't able to hit Nintendo hard enough to become competitive. Even with all that, they still only sold like a 500,000 units, and that's why Nakayama brought Kalinsky in, because Kalinsky was a very
Hadn't he
good.
been working at Mattel, I want to say?
He was at Matchbox, and um before, so he was at Mattel. He actually he went from Mattel to Sega, and he was like, it was wild. So he started at Mattel, he went to Matchbox, and then went to Sega.
Okay, so he went to Matchbox because I thought he
Yeah,
had
but
worked.
you are correct. He was at Mattel
Okay,
because
because
that's
I
where
remember
his
him working on like Barbie, and that was one of the first things that drew
and
me because
Hot
Barbie
Wheels
was huge, and
and
still
Hot
is,
Wheels. Yep.
and Hot
The reason he
Wheels.
went to
Yeah.
Matchbox was because he was successful with the Hot Wheels, so Matchbox brought him in. And then
No, that makes
and
total
then
sense.
yeah, and then he came to Sega. And the thing, and this is, I read this as part of that whole console wars thing, and it makes sense. You know how he sort of started the whole console loss leader thing, where he was a big. I think the best analogy to make is like the razor blade razor analogy. Sell the razors cheap, and then sell the razor blades, and that's where your money's made. And
Yeah.
that's where he told Sega of Japan, he told Nakayama, you got to drop the price of Genesis. And at first Nakayama didn't want to do it, but he ended up trusting Kalinsky enough to drop the price. And then that's when the Genesis, between that and then he went to Nakayama and said, you got to put Sonic, you got to pack Sonic in with the Genesis.
Well,
And
there's a
this
whole
was
other story behind Sonic too, because Sonic wouldn't really even exist without Mario. He was the one that kind of spearheaded that idea of you got to have something to combat Mario. He's too
yep,
big. You need your own personality.
yep. And then Kalinsky said you got to put it in um you got to put it in the box. And even though Nakayama let him do it, the entire Japanese board of directors, and this was in the Console Wars show. The whole board of
Thanks for swinging
directors.
by, Oak City.
Yeah, have a good one, Oak. Um, literally almost laughed him out of the room. Like, they were like, you cannot take our hottest selling property and put it free with the Genesis. What is wrong with you? But Nakayama, he basically, I mean, he said, I hired you to make decisions. So if this is your decision, and he was going to make him sink or swim with it. And that, it actually, the Genesis for that whole 91 holiday season, when they put it in with the Genesis outsold the Super Nintendo almost 3-1.
Well, part of it too was
worked.
they were doing heavy marketing around that time too. So
Yep.
it was a twofold thing. One, they were heavily marketing Sonic as being the much faster, edgier version of like Mario, and playing up how much of a kid's console Nintendo was around that time.
Yep.
Advertising heavily into their sports game, leaning into that whole image on it, and just the fact that they kept on the marketing pressure with the kind of more edgy 90s thing. That's why if you go back and you look at Sonic, you actually look at Sonic, especially in the 90s, he is such a 90s character.
Oh,
It is
God, yeah.
such a horrible trope. It's almost painful. Like, even going back and looking at Sonic Adventure, like, a lot of the lines, as much as I think Sonic Adventure is a great game, so many of the lines are just cringy as all get out. They just don't, they didn't age well. Let's put it that way. So as much as that's probably, and I hate to say it,
Which is why I don't like
probably
Sonic
Sonic's
now.
best 3D outing outside of maybe Frontiers. Because I can't think of another 3D Sonic that did it better than the original Sonic Adventure, maybe Sonic Adventure 2.
Those were the two. And they tried to make, like,
Yeah, I want to do a whole video on Mascot Wars. I really need to.
That would
like,
be a
dig
fun
into
one.
all the mascots and stuff. That could be a long video.
That would be a fun one. I am one of the few that actually did like Sonic 3D Blast, but it wasn't the same as Sonic Adventure.
My
Sonic
understanding
Adventure
is
had
Michael Jackson made the music for Sonic 3, but he wasn't
3.
officially credited for it.
He asked not to be. And he also did music for Space Channel 5.
Yes. That was Dreamcast era, I believe.
That was
Which
Dreamcast.
we haven't quite gotten to, because we still have Sega CD and 32X to kind of talk about before we even get 32X and Saturn. I think we're going to talk about kind of in tandem. If we can get there. We're already at almost 10 o'clock here.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't gotten past the Genesis yet.
So and we can get to that quickly. I just wanted to say so we were talking about what and Charlie alluded to it. That meeting was called the 4-point plan that Kalinsky had.
Yeah,
and
Charlie
we talked about 3 of them.
The famous 4-point meeting.
Yes. So there was cutting the price of the console.
Yep.
The aggressive marketing that you talked about.
Yep.
Replacing
Sonic.
Altered Beast with Sonic.
Yep.
And creating a U.S. development studio to make games for the American market.
Right.
That was another big thing that they wanted to
handle
do.
importing games into the market, which Japan never liked. They never really got along well with Sega of America.
No. But it worked. And it's important. I think it's important to get into the next part of
I agree, because as you start hitting because the 32X is all about Sega of America.
Yep. Well, yes. Yes and no. It was weird.
It wasn't originally their idea, but they were tasked to come up with it.
Yeah, they were tasked to come. They didn't want to, but if they were going to, and I remember the guy who developed it said, "This is a dumb idea, but okay, okay, if you want it, but this is stupid."
You got it.
Right, but I think it bears the Genesis at the time they got out of the holiday market in 1991 owned 60+% of the game market. Think about that. Nintendo went from completely dominating, and I mean 90%.
They had like 90 to 95% of the market, and they went down to 60. It was a huge.
It went down to
huge cut.
45%.
Yeah.
They were 45% of the market, and the Genesis outsold even the Super Nintendo for 4 Christmas seasons because they were lower priced. They had a larger library. It was amazing. And then Nintendo's, and I'm reading this off of the Console Wars page. Nintendo's dollar share of the US 16-bit market dropped from 60% at the end of 1992 to 37% at the end of 1993.
Yeah, no, it was
and Sega claimed 55% of all hardware, 16-bit hardware sales during 1994. And then the Genesis would outsell, the SNES would outsell the Genesis from 1995 to 1997 on the back of Donkey Kong Country.
And here's where things start to get a little bit slippery for where their forward momentum went. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring this up. So we're gonna talk about the first elephant in the room, which is actually a good piece of kit. But
I love my Sega CD.
There's nothing wrong with the Sega CD, but this was the start of multiple attachments onto the console, diluting the focus on the console into too many avenues. You have to agree on that.
I would, except for the Sega CD. And the reason that I will disagree on the Sega CD is because everybody else was trying to do it too. TurboGrafx did it with the TurboGrafx CD. And had Sony and Nintendo worked their stuff out, there would have been a CD add-on to the Super Nintendo. So I don't, this is the only one of the 2 main add-ons that I don't apply that to, because the rest of the market was doing it too. They're not the only ones that were doing it.
Well, Nintendo didn't really do this move. They were in talks with Sony, and there's still people that didn't know that Sony actually started out doing an attachment for the SNES. It was going to be CD attachment, and then that fell through, and they decided.
They actually had started talking to Sega. And Sega said no, so they went to Nintendo. Nintendo started working with them, and then somehow
they didn't like them, and they think that with Philips because the CDI came out, and that actually had some official Nintendo games on it. Sony got pissed and said, "Well, we're going to make this thing regardless of any of you guys.
We're going to make our own system." So blame Nintendo.
That was a big mistake on both.
That was not Sega's mistake. That was Nintendo's mistake.
Yes,
Nintendo created the PlayStation.
Yep. So this came out. It had some good games on it. It had Sewer Shark. You had Night Trap. I can't remember if Corpse Killers was on there. I know Gun Gal was on there.
Time Gal
Lunar was on there. That was an amazing game.
It was so good.
There was a really good version of, I think it was Final Fight that was on there.
That had the best version. Rage? No, Final Fight. So hold on. So the pack-in for the Sega CD
with Sewer Shark.
The original pack-ins for the first generation CD, the one on the left, had the full motion game was Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective.
Okay.
And then a 3-pack of actually a 4-pack, Soul Feast, which was a CD upgrade to the Genesis game Soul Feast, Soul Deist rather, and then a 3-pack of Columns, Altered Beast, and
Tyler,
Streets
you're
of Rage.
just in time.
No, you did not. You were perfectly in time.
You arrived at the perfect time because we just now started going into the Sega CD.
Yep. So those were the pack-ins that I got when I got the Sega CD.
See, mine came with Sewer Shark because the first one I saw was the Model 2.
Yep.
And that people
came with
argued with me. I had people argue with me up and down one end, down the other, that there was not one that worked with the Genesis. There was not, the Mark II did not work with the original Genesis. You had to have the Model 2, and that is not correct.
That's not correct.
You'll notice on the picture I have here, it overlaps a little bit. There's actually a little extender piece that you can put on there.
Yeah.
On this bottom. that will make it line up perfectly with the Model 1 Genesis. And
Yeah,
regardless,
it
it
worked
works.
just fine. It
It
worked
works.
just fine.
Yeah,
I
plays
had
in, it
both of
works
them. It
perfectly
worked just
fine.
fine.
But that's
I
the one that I had, and
preferred.
that's the one that got packaged with Sewer Shark, which was an amazing
Yes.
game for the time.
I still play it today. I've streamed that game.
I know,
And
I've seen you stream that game.
So people have asked me because I'm a Sega guy. People have asked me, what's your favorite Sega system? And they expect me to say Dreamcast. Believe it or not, my favorite system was the Sega CD, and I will tell you why. Pound for pound, Sewer Shark, Ground Zero Texas, which was another one of those visual pictures games, Sonic CD. When they used Sylpheed, when they used the hardware, and this was part of Sega's issue, a lot of the games were just kind of ports of Genesis games with a CD soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
But when they actually used...
Well, that's not completely their fault, because a lot of games were doing that around that time. TurboGrafx,
They
a lot
were.
of that stuff mostly would have got improved was the sound, because it's a CD, it's not a DVD.
Correct.
So the big
And
jump
again-
in quality was 1, storage space, and 2, audio quality, right?
Right. However, the Sega CD had some of the things that were missing out of the Genesis, like a scaler chip. It did, because remember the Super Nintendo had the Mode 7 chip that did scaling and rotation. The Sega CD had that capability. Let me grab something because I want to show you where that one of the mistakes that Sega really made that they corrected later, but it was too late. Give me a second.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is the point in the show when I get up.
Okay. I don't have any way of doing a solo layout for you right now. We need to work on that later. Actually, I'll try to scale you up. We'll just do it that way.
This should have been the definitive version of Afterburner.
Let me see.
This should have been what everybody was waiting for when Afterburner came out on the Genesis. And this is made by Sega. It has a phenomenal soundtrack. I go driving down the road listening to this soundtrack. I work out to this soundtrack. It is an unbelievable Outrun and Afterburner.
Sorry,
have
guys,
two
I'm
of the
moving
best
everything in
soundtracks.
real time. It looks goofy. I apologize.
No, but here's the problem. This played like a Genesis game. It was horrible. It had no scaling in it, no rotation. It was nowhere near an arcade level experience. That didn't come until the 32X. A lot of games did not take advantage of that. However, all right, hold on. Since I'm in the limelight, give me a second because he mentioned Final Fight. Hold on.
He did mention Final Fight. Slippy, Popful Mail, Batman Returns, Lords of Thunder. Lords of Thunder was TurboGrafx. Okay, Ty Lord's saying he works out to the Final Fight CD soundtrack. That's pretty dope.
Hi.
All I heard was noises.
All right. He is right. Lords of Thunder did come out for the Sega CD as well.
Did it?
All right,
Okay,
so
I remember that for the TurboGrafx. I don't remember it for the Sega CD.
Ty Lord, this is for you, brother. So let me tell you what this was the best home conversion of Final Fight there was. The Super Nintendo version only had 2 characters and was only single player, whereas this version was the full arcade. You had all 3 characters. You had Hagar, Cody, and Guy. You could play it 2-player, and the soundtrack, he is not wrong. And in fact, there is one soundtrack that just, it's like you hear it in the background, you hear this really great guitar track and you got this guy in the background going, oh, and I can't remember what the name of it is. I'll tell you in a second. And Ty Lord, you can agree with me on this, has the absolute funniest and worst voice acting ever. I will never get out of my head.
Oh god, they probably shouldn't have thrown voice acting in there.
Mr. Hager. Oh my goodness. How
AZN's
much is that
asking
for
how much
sale?
it sells for.
Nope. Nope. Nope.
I think he more
So
wants to know how much its value is. I don't think he's offering to buy it from you.
it's
Probably because I don't think any of us really want to spend that kind of money right now.
no. Um the other, so when they did so when Sega did use the games correctly, the system correctly, Batman Returns. So Batman Returns was a port of the Genesis game, except they added these unbelievable, and I mean unbelievable to this day, driving scenes that you drove either the Batmobile or the Bat at later
Hey,
stages.
Viscore, how you doing, man?
The that bat boat that went through the sewers to get to Penguin.
Yeah.
This, and also this is Spencer Nilsson. This is, I always said I had two favorite game soundtrack composers of all time, my top two, and not necessarily in that order. It's Tommy Tallarico and Spencer Nilsson. And this Spencer Nilsson did a number of incredible Sega CD soundtracks, including this, Echo the Dolphin, Sonic CD, and he was amazing. And then you had games by the way, Sony, before they went to the PlayStation, games like Sunday Night NFL, which is a Sony ImageSoft game that had full motion video of, Chris Berman, and the game had great scaling and rotation on the field, so it actually felt much better than a Genesis game. So and then there was Sylpheed, which was such an amazing title for its time. It was polygons over top of full motion video that made it look like a 3D polygonal game, but it was actually like text. Not polygons. It was textures over a 3D model, a 3D video that made a full motion video that made it look 3D. Those were the games. Like, that was a showpiece for my Sega CD. And now, you know what? My Monday night retro coming up this Monday is going to be Sega CD. That's what's happening. So exactly. Tommy Tallarico tunes on Terminator. Terminator was another game. Put the soundtrack aside for a second. The Terminator Sega CD game was a wholly different game than the Genesis version and the Super Nintendo version. That was nice. New levels, different mechanics. Had the full motion video cutscenes of the movie. Those were the things that made the Sega CD, and that's why it's my favorite system. The Dreamcast is right there second, and of course the Saturn's right there third. But for what the Sega CD did to revolutionize when they used it correctly was just it. I wish more people had gotten into it than did, but it was my favorite system. My favorite system, Sega system. I think you muted yourself. We see your mouth moving.
Yep, I forgot I muted myself. My wife came in.
Yep, hang on, Tyler.
I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought, so I muted myself for the time being.
I appreciate that, because you get me started on Sega CD. I
get you started on Sega. I knew this would probably be a long podcast for that sole reason, honestly. Regardless of who we had in here.
And you know what's funny? We laugh about this, but the truth is, 1990s and up to mid 2000 Sega, and I say mid 2000 Sega because I do put some of the OG Xbox stuff in there. Mid 90s and mid 2000 Sega was my favorite Sega. The Sega that we see now is foreign to me.
The Sega we now is more of a publisher. Quite frankly, they're more a publisher of a game. They're not really developers of games at this point. I would like to see that trend turn, but I just don't know that we're gonna see that. But as much as we could talk about that, we do have to move into the
We do.
32X to a little bit. And we're going to kind of do this real quick and kind of move into Saturn as well, because these two kind of go hand in hand to an extent. Because what Sega was trying to do was to extend the life of the Genesis as they worked out the kinks and got the marketing ready and got everything ready to go for their upcoming Saturn console. So they went to Sega of America and said, we need to move into the 32-bit era. And this was kind of a little bit of a snap decision because the Jaguar was coming out on the market. They knew other consoles were coming out down the pipeline. They knew about the PlayStation, and they wanted to go ahead and get into the 16-bit market, the 32-bit market. Sorry.
Yep.
So part of that push was to start really getting focused in on bridging that gap. And what they wanted was a product that would help them ease people into that with a $100 to $200 attachment of the 32X that would help them limp along until the actual Saturn was ready to launch. So they said, hey, we want you, Nintendo, or Sega of America, to make this thing. And they went, okay. Why? And they're like, well, we want it. And they're like, alrighty. If it's what you want, then I guess we'll go ahead and make this thing. And they did. Now, the problem with the 32X was it only ever really got any kind of support in the United States because we had to wait like 4 months to a year after it launched. And keep in mind, every single one of these things, the Genesis had a power brick. The Sega CD had a power brick.
Yep.
The 32X,
We called this the Tower of
32X
Power.
had a power brick. This was called the Tower of Power that needed almost 3 power strips in
Yep.
order to utilize the entire console because you can only really fit 2 bricks on a power strip.
Yep.
So hooking all this up was a nightmare, and some of the 32X games would actually use the Sega CD, and it was called the 32X CD. So
I have one of those.
So you needed the CD attachment in order to be
The
able
two
to deal
games
with this thing.
The two games I have one, Shadow Warrior, and the other one was Charles Barkley's Shut Up and Jam. I didn't have that one, but I have Shadow. I'm not going to necessarily get up again, but just so everybody knows, I've got about 3/4 of the 32X library. I've got a good chunk of the Sega CD library. I've got a very good chunk of the Saturn library. I've got a higher chunk of the Dreamcast library. I love this stuff. I bought into the 32X.
I did not, and here's why. I was really down in the dumps on Sega at this time. And the reason was because I bought the power converter. For those of you guys that don't know, and I'm not going to try to pull it into here because it's just too much work tonight. The power converter would attach to the Model 1 Genesis, and there is a video of that on this channel, on both Rumble and YouTube, about the power converter, so you guys can watch about it there. But it allowed your Genesis to pass through Master System games, and it would take both the cards, and it played almost everything with the original hardware, but you couldn't find any of that stuff when I got it. So I had this $60, $70 attachment that I couldn't do anything with. I had this Sega CD attachment that was really underutilized at the time. Then the 32X came out. Well, I was already kind of disappointed with the power converter. I was already kind of disappointed with the Sega CD support at the time for what I wanted it for. I was kind of getting a little frustrated with Sega in general. All these new consoles are coming out because right around the time this thing came out, you also had things like the Project Dolphin was on its way coming in, or Project Ultra, I think is what they called it. Project Dolphin, I think it was the GameCube.
That was the GameCube. Ultra, I think, was the
Project
N64.
Ultra was going to be the N60, would turn into the N64. The Atari Jaguar was on the market, wasn't interested in that at all. I had no nostalgia for Atari. None of the games looked awful to me. I had no interest.
Tempest 2000 was...
everybody holds up Tempest 2000. And
Love that game.
I don't mind Tempest 2000. Um,
I'll grant
and
you.
from what I've seen, but I mean, if I were to look at that graphically, and I have no recollection or love of the original Tempest, I would not buy an Atari for that. Like if you just look at
no,
it,
yeah,
looks
yeah,
like something
and
from like 1980s, like 1980s vector graphics that somebody threw on a console, on a 32-bit on a was it six? That was a they were touting as what, a 64-bit console at the time, I think. Because
they were.
PlayStation was
Yes,
32.
because their motto,
They had
their
two
motto was
32-bit processors that ran in tandem that added up to 64 bits.
yeah, their motto was do the math.
Right. So technically, they had the first 64-bit console, kind of. If you tallied them both together, if you did them individually, it was 32, and the bus line caused them some issues as well. But that's a whole other topic. But you had that coming out. Everybody knew the PlayStation was coming out or came out, and it was in a tough spot. And then on top of that, the day it launched, literally the day after it launched in Japan, lo and behold, in comes the Saturn packaged with Virtual Fighter.
Yep.
Now, Virtual Fighter is another one of those games, right? This is another big Sega time. It's a huge change up in the fighting game market because up until this time, there had not been a 3D fighter. They did not exist. Yep. Virtual Fighter was the very first three-dimensional fighter. And people
remains
were crazy for it. It had more grounded combat. It had more realistic combat. Okay, more ground in the fact that if you didn't jump, if you jumped, that it was just god awful.
Oh yeah, yes, there was the because that was the Japanese and Chinese influence into the game was that floaty, jumpy. But when you're right, it was more grounded in. There were no fireballs. There were no dragon punches. No
major super weapons. Everything's more of a.
It is hand-to-hand fighting.
Hand-to-hand combat, which would be more the mainstay with pretty much most 3D fighters, at least the popular ones moving forward, because Tekken would come along and it would be very grounded. Even Soul Edge, when it came out, was more grounded in like sword play, and the moveset was more realistic. You didn't have a whole lot of like super moves with people flying across the screen and, spinning kicks and, fiery uppercuts and fireballs and stuff like that. People breathing fire. That stuff didn't happen. So that was a huge title for them and a big change in the arcade. So everybody wanted to have that at home. The Saturn gave them that at launch. So since this launched the day after with Virtual Fighter, the Japanese market went, I'll just pay you an extra $200 and go home with Virtual Fighter. Thanks.
Yep. Well, and then all the third parties in America saw that and went so all right, back up a second to the 32X because while the 32X,
I don't want to spend all night because we got two more consoles to cover.
I know, but there's
and
some.
I really do need to deal with my wife at some point tonight.
All right, so there is. I mean, we may have to break this up into two then because I've got an hour just on the Dreamcast.
I mean, if we want to stop at the 32X and then we can do this and just do a 32X through Dreamcast or Saturn and Dreamcast.
Saturn and Dreamcast. We might have to because there's a lot to talk. There's a lot to talk about with the Saturn and Dreamcast.
There's a lot to talk about on a lot of these consoles. I honestly thought we'd be able to get more of this in the time that we had, but we've been going at this for at least an hour and 20 or more and straight. Just on the topic. I'm not even talking about what we talked about. Just catching up with.
Oh, I know. Well, and this is. I knew you and I would be able to handle this because you and I have a boatload of knowledge of this stuff.
Yeah.
I do want to. It does bear some saying that initially, because remember they had third parties on board for the 32X. EA made games for the 32X. There were third parties that were coming onto the platform because it was cheaper. Because it was cheap, it did use the Genesis, so there was some backward compatibility. The initial reception to the 32X was very positive. It sold well out of the gate. The problem became
outside of Japan. In Japan, it's
outside of
terrible.
Japan. Outside of Japan.
And again, this goes back to, and we'll touch on this too for a little bit. This goes back to, and this has been a problem. This is not only a problem with Sega. This is a problem with Japanese companies. Regardless of how well something is selling, if it's not doing gangbuster in Japan, they don't care.
No.
Now that has started to change. You've seen a complete shift with Sony and the PlayStation looking at more of a global market first and Japan second, which is pissing Japan off to no end. They're actually pretty unhappy about it. But
it was amazing because and this is what drove Kalinsky out, because Kalinsky said to Nakayama, he said, okay, the Saturn might come out next year. He said, I can get another year out of the Genesis. Yeah. And Nakayama said, no, you need to do this because Atari. And it really came up on Atari. Like, I don't know why they concentrated on Atari.
Well,
I think they made a mistake.
They did this a couple of times. They did it with the Sega CD too, because they knew the TurboGrafx CD was out there, and so they made a snap decision to come out with a CD attachment. They didn't have to do it. But
they at least planned that attachment well.
Yeah, if you look at supported it better than the 32X got support, because the 32X I think maybe had like 20 games total. I think
something like, which is why they're all rare. Like I have the Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire.
Yeah, that one's like $800 or something like that now.
$1,500.
And apparently it's not a very good game, but it's super rare.
It sucks. No, it is a horrible game, but it is $1,500 because it is super rare.
Right.
The thing was, if you got under the hood of the 32X, the guts of the 32X were the main guts of the Saturn. It was the same. And there were
some things that it actually processed better because it could flex the Genesis in tandem.
Well, that was also the problem. So, I'll tell you a great guy to go watch on this, because he did all of the, and I'm not a big fan of the heck's that company that does all these comparisons now. Oh my God. Visual reality, virtual, whatever the hell they, the Eurogamers.
You're not talking about Ars Technica, are you? Or
No. Hold on a second. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. This is horrible. A Digital Foundry.
Oh, Digital Foundry. Okay, yeah. I know those guys. Yes.
Digital Foundry did a breakdown of every 32X game, and they actually showed games like Primal Rage, where the characters were done with the 32X, and then they unplugged the 32X video cable from the back of the Saturn. All of the audio and all of the backgrounds were done by the Saturn, which means as good as the foreground stuff looked, the background still had that 64 color washed out thing.
Okay,
a lot of those games.
You mean the Genesis, because you said the Saturn.
The Genesis, sorry, yes, okay. The Genesis. A lot of the games didn't look any better than a Super Nintendo game because they used the Genesis for things they didn't need to use the Genesis for, or shouldn't have used the Genesis for. The 32X actually had some beef behind it, and again, there were games like Zaxxon Moonbase 2000, which was a complete 3D game. Star Wars Arcade was an amazing game on the 32X, but there weren't enough of those games to make the 32X worth buying a stopgap, when then the Saturn not only was going to come out simply a year later, but as we'll talk about on the next show, there started they
had multiple issues going into this too. Like from the beginning, like, because even on the Genesis, they couldn't get as many people on board. They didn't have as many developers as Nintendo had, because those existing exclusivity agreements were still there. The Super Nintendo, once it launched, did outsell the Genesis. The Genesis cut their market heavily. They did a great job there. But by this time, Nintendo is starting to be looked at as this kind of tyrant, right? Because people are getting wise to them. And right around like 94, 95, the PlayStation drops. And the PlayStation starts sending ripples through both of these companies, heavy
Yep.
ripples. They
Yep.
start tearing into Nintendo because licensing on PlayStation was like a fourth or less of what it was on Nintendo. They had CD based games, which gave you not only more storage space to be able to do what you wanted to do, but better audio quality. This opened up new avenues for developers, and they were making more profit while they were doing it at the same time. And Sega's basically trying to struggle to get their next console out, which, as we'll talk about there, was also based heavily on their arcade infrastructure, which is going to take another dip.
Yep.
So,
But and one other thing that, and this was backing up just a little bit to the Sega CD, something else that really kind of it didn't it wasn't a mistake by Sega, but it was an well, no, it was a mistake by, and this was where, again, watching that Console Wars documentary had given me some information I wasn't aware of. Donkey Kong Country was built in partnership with Silicon Graphics. Silicon
that doesn't
Graphics,
surprise me. Who did most of the design work for the Nintendo 64?
and that happened because Sega didn't want to work with them. They approached Sega first. And I didn't know that until I watched that documentary.
I don't think I knew that either. I knew Silicon. I didn't know that Rare had partnered with Silicon Valley to make that on there. I knew Miyamoto was really unhappy and didn't like the look of Donkey Kong Country when it came out, and didn't understand why people liked it so well. And that's one of the reasons that the Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island was stylized the way it was. It was him trying to counter that with a different art style to try to rival the popularity of Donkey Kong Country, which didn't work. It was a very good game, and it was very popular, but a lot of people had issues with it, along with, like, constantly crying Mario. But so I knew he had some issues with Rare's approach on that, but I didn't know that they had gone to Silicon Works to basically get some of their design choices. And that kind of makes sense, because when you look at that on the Super Nintendo, that is probably one of the most 2.5 dimensional looking games on the console. It almost looks 3D in a lot of ways.
So and what happened was, so here it is, and here's I'll just give you this to I can't because we're not in StreamYard. So here's an article from STV.
I can try to pull it up and then do it that way.
Here, I'll put it in the.
If you put it in Discord, I can pull it up, because I can hide this and I can put it up on the display capture once I got it.
Yep. Because this is the same. Reading this is the same thing that I saw in the documentary, and this is one of those where, had Kalinske got his way, the Nintendo might not have had a chance to put out a good N64 console. Scroll down.
So here's, let me move this out of the way. I had a couple of the chats over there because we weren't really using the screen.
Scroll down to, and after all that, the Saturn was less powerful than its rivals anyway. Keep going. We're almost there.
Okay.
All right. So right under there.
Let me see if I can make this bigger so people can read it easier. It may overtake us, but I'm okay with that. If I can get it the right screen. Oh my God. It drives me crazy.
There. What I tend to do is just make the text bigger.
I don't know.
Just make the browser text bigger.
I don't know if I can zoom in on this or not.
Yeah, you should be able to. I think it's control and your mouse wheel should. Yeah, there you go.
There
So,
we go. I'm going to
yep.
shrink this back down a little bit then, or at least move it. Oh, I'm on the wrong screen. It helps if I'm on
Yeah.
the right screen doing these things.
I do that. This is how I show stuff all the time.
Yeah, and it's... Well, here's the thing. OBS is kind of a nightmare when you get multiple things on the screen because they're there, but they're not there. There. Now we can see the chat.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
So
This is one of the things I like about StreamYard. It's much smoother when I do stuff like this. But okay. Continue.
All right, so scroll down just a hair more, just to the next paragraph. Here it is. The real shame is that once again, Microsoft might have been able to prevent Nintendo from getting their hands on that CPU in the first place for the N64. Silicon Graphics, major chipset manufacturer, had actually approached Sega about producing chips for the Sega Saturn, which would have been amazing. And then again, and once again, even though Sega of America was fully behind it, Sega's headquarters in Japan shot the idea down. Silicon Graphics shrugged their shoulders.
We need to go into this later because there's a reason behind that. And they had a legitimate and solid reason behind that at the time, but I don't think we have enough time tonight to go into this because you need to get some sleep.
Because that's...
I need to be able to know if, and we're going to spend another 2 hours on this alone easily.
Yeah,
because
and this gets...
and the Dreamcast and all the hubbub that happened is Kalinske exited and the gentleman whose name I can't remember came in and started cutting heads. Things get worse for Sega by a long shot.
Oh yeah, but this was the final. This was kind of the final straw, for Kalinske. I mean, this was kind of his final. Like he went to Japan and said, "Guys, I got this golden opportunity." And while there might have been there was some initial issues, Silicon Graphics was working through those issues. And had they stuck with it, the Saturn might have looked wholly different. And so instead, the N64 came
Silicon
out.
Graphics actually... Oh, that attached. That's weird. Silicon Graphics themselves wanted to they wanted to get into the console. Like they desperately wanted to get into doing consoles because they had done as much as they thought they could do with their hardware as far as that market goes, right? Because they were doing more mainframes and work with the military, and they thought they had gotten about as far as they could go in that market, and so they were looking for new avenues, and they knew that the console market was starting to catch up to where it was affordable to start taking some of their high-end mainframe chips and supercomputer technology and to put it into a console. And so they were actively looking for partners at the time.
And at that, and right before that happened, and this is where Silicon Graphics helped Nintendo at first.
Listen
Rare.
Well, my wife really wants to talk to me about something.
So, hi Lord, I appreciate it, but keep in mind it's also 12:30 here on the East Coast, so I can't do this much longer either. When Rare was building Donkey Kong Country, they bought Silicon Graphics workstations to do the 3D model rendering, and then we're able to then compress it down into a SNES console cartridge. That made the 32X, for example, completely freaking obsolete too. Why would you have to buy this when if you got a Super Nintendo, Donkey Kong Country can do the same thing.
Super Nintendo was a shockingly powerful console for a long time with the Mode 7 and all that. It could do a surprising amount of stuff. It was kind of like the PlayStation 2 before the PlayStation 2 was a thing, because the PlayStation 2, even at the end of its life, was rivaling a lot of the early to mid-generation PlayStation 3 and 360 games, because people had finally fully understood that architecture and just how powerful it was. And the Super Nintendo was much the same way for its era. So people were still doing things that were just insanely powerful.
And it wasn't a 3D game. I mean, what Rare did was, and again, this is part of that documentary. All Rare did was take those 3D models and convert them into sprites. They just were able to compress them into a way that that they didn't lose any detail. So
Yeah.
what looked like a
Well, and they
3D
used a
game.
lot of that in Killer Instinct, and then even before that,
Mhm.
Star Fox was an amazing game for the Super
Yep.
Nintendo that was
Yep.
unlike anything else that had hit a console really before then. You had not seen those kind of polygonal graphics on a console. But that's a whole
No,
other discussion. But it is
that is.
it's a discussion in this, in the fact that the Super Nintendo was had a lot of very smart people doing things with it that were shocking for that era of gaming. Like
Yep.
that kind of polygonal graphic on Star Fox. You got to remember that kind of stuff wouldn't happen again until Sony with the PlayStation. And that's when a lot of those polygonal graphics and things like that started to kind of really hit and become more
Yep.
mainstay.
And that's where we're going to pick up on the Saturn, because
Mm-hmm.
that was the start of their mistakes on
And a
that platform.
colossal shift in the way the industry was looking at video games. There had already been
Yep.
one going from the arcade into the 8-bit era, because you have more story driven content, more actual ends to games, less focus on points, more focus on completing the game and completing the stages, and more of a story focus and building stories and worlds around these things that wasn't there in the arcade. Sega misstepped on that, on moving into that, and didn't move into it fast enough, which gave Nintendo a lead. They started to catch up with the Genesis, and then they start to repeat some of these same mistakes, and you'll see it again when we talk about the Saturn and then go into the Dreamcast, because it's kind of a thing where Sega of Japan's short-sightedness and how the market was moving and what was going on around them caused them a lot of pain, and
Yep.
in the end almost killed them as a company. Dun dun
Well, it certainly
dun.
changed them. It
Uh,
certainly changed them.
it almost killed them, dude. Like let's be
I know,
honest the
but
way it is. It almost killed them,
look,
flat out.
look, look. The Sega of today, that Sega is dead. That Sega is dead. To
Yeah.
me, that Sega's dead. And yeah, I so we need a whole second show.
We can do that. We're going to figure out how to plan the second one of these, because I know the holidays are coming up, so we'll have one more retro roots to kind of dovetail into kind of wrapping things up a little bit. We're going to have one more retro roots before Christmas. Um, I'm not sure if we're going to do a more serious show, if we're just going to do like holiday reminiscing and just some BSing with you guys, because that could be a fun topic. Um, I'm glad I kind of spent the time to get the pictures and things like that in here, because I think it really kind of helped keep us on track on this, and that's kind of what I wanted to start doing, is kind of bringing the focus back onto our topic of the show, while still including you guys and being able to have some fun and get around without completely losing the plot of what we're trying to do with the podcast. You guys are always a major part of the podcast. Don't think that you're ever not.
Hmm.
You're the main reason we're doing it, and you're the main reason it kind of moves as smoothly as it does. Your interaction is key to any of these shows I do and any live stream I do. Period. Um, but I did want to make sure that the focus was on the topic, because that's what I told you guys we were going to talk about. So that's what we should talk about. So, still up in the air if we're going to do that. I know we want to do a TurboGrafx episode. That one's going to be a long one. I may try to get everybody to start sooner on that one, because I know we're going to have two guests on that one. We're going to have DJC Game Studios, and we're going to have Super Mega Graphics 64 on the show on that one. And I would like to get them in because they both have a very deep knowledge into PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16, and I know they've been looking forward to
Yes.
talking about it. So I need to schedule that one. And we also want to do a part two of this one, so that's going to be a couple shows that are coming up. Um, like I said before, you'll notice that I didn't have my normal launch videos today. I am going to have a Neo Geo video. I'm going to drop that on Wednesday at the same time that I normally drop my videos.
Loved my Neo Geo.
So that will be 3:30 in the afternoon Mountain Time. Adjust for your time zone accordingly, or catch it whenever you can. It's about a 14-15 minute video. I'm hoping it lives up to the quality that I've tried to do with these videos in the past. I think it's pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. Hopefully you guys will be as well. So that's going to be
I
what's
can't
coming
wait
up
to
this
see
week.
that one
Um,
because I loved the Neo Geo, and I'm glad to see that SNK still does those IPs,
yeah, there's a lot of those IPs that
justice.
have way outlived the console, and
Yep.
they've adapted with the times, which is
Yep.
fantastic.
And look, nothing as far as I'm concerned, the price was the price. There wasn't anything fundamentally wrong with the system or the company. It was a niche product. They knew it. They
Well,
knew it
and
was a
and
niche
and
product.
and a part of that I went into is they weren't even originally going to sell it. It was going to be a rental.
Right.
It wasn't intended to be sold to begin with, but there was an outcry for it, so they relented and went ahead and did it. So that's part of that video, and part of the way the market was changing is also part of my thesis of why things went the way they did with that system, and consumer understanding as well as the expense. So there's a lot of stuff that I've kind of taken my own thoughts and leaps as to why I think they started to have problems on a lot of it. That's just based on the hardware of the system. So, but I think it all kind of makes sense and comes together cohesively. So that'll be what's coming up for me on Wednesday. There may or may not be streams on there. I do want to start doing some more educational streams on Premiere and stuff like that as I can start to get into. I haven't lost my drive to do that. Those will only be on Rumble, but I want to make sure that I want to do it more like an organized kind of classroom plan kind of thing, like have a theme and kind of run with it, right? Or a good number of things I want to do, and then run you guys through the paces on that. I would love for Rumble to have chapters on things, but they don't have that capability, and I think even YouTube's removing them. So it's going to kind of be what it is. So if I can focus those, and even if they're not 2 hours, if it's like 30 minutes to an hour, that it's kind of a thing, so long as it focuses on the topic and then people come back and reference it, that's how I want that to look and feel. So that'll be coming up eventually, whether that hits before the New Year's, another story. That's kind of what I've got going on. I have multiple other regular videos starting next week that I'll be working on this week. So you'll have there's at least four. There's going to be at least four more in the can of the regular videos, so those will continue throughout the whole thing. I will be reorganizing this room at some point. That may or may not mean a RetroRoots takes a ding while we're doing that, because I've got to get this desk reorganized. I bought a new desk to be able to do things more efficiently in this room, so that'll be happening at some point soon. So that's some more IRL stuff that may interrupt some of the ideas I have going on. Hopefully not for too long, so we'll see how that goes. But that's what's going on with me. Mike, what do you got going on this week? I know you got NLG, right?
Yep, we got the NLG show tomorrow night at 9:30. Peter and I'm not sure if Chris is still under the weather. Um, so the NLG show is where we talk the modern game side. The Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer dropped. We're gonna talk about that and just start kind of making our way towards the holidays. And then on Thursday, I'm gonna keep running at actually Thursday. Peter may be streaming. I may be taking Thursday night off. He is going to be streaming Avatar, the new Avatar game that's coming out.
Okay. I've avoided them because I don't have any big interest in the IP, so the game didn't.
I don't
me
either, but I
do.
keep hearing the game is incredible. So I'm gonna check out the game. There are some movie IPs I can't stand that the game actually happened to be all right. So I'm gonna give it a look, see, and so if Peter does not stream on Thursday, I'll take over and continue on my Deep Space remake journey, which is a phenomenal game. On Friday night with Peter and Mike, we are going to play Sea of Thieves. We're going to run through the Secret of Monkey Island storyline, which I'm looking forward to because I was a big Secret of Monkey Island fan from LucasArts back in the day.
I heard the DLC was good. That might actually get me to try Sea of Thieves because the Monkey Island stuff looks fun to me. I've not been big on jumping into Sea of Thieves because I've heard that the PvP and all that can be kind of like unpleasant to
Yeah,
deal
the
with.
crossplay.
And I don't want to deal with PvP in that game. It's one of the reasons I had some issues with part of Demon's Souls was there was one
Oh, it's
mod.
why it's trust me, it's why guys like Peter and some of my other friends who like Peter is a had made Pirate Legend in that game, which is getting to the level 50 of, and he quit over the PvP and the crossplay stuff. But the Sea of Thieves is not a PvP storyline, so we will be able to go through it without having to deal with anything.
Okay.
So that'll be this week. I am not sure what I'm doing over the weekend, and then Monday I will do a Monday night retro since that's the opposite of this show.
Right.
And guys, Sega CD time. So that's happening. We're gonna do some Sega CD.
Yep. Also, if you guys want any more deep dives into any of the things that we've covered, pretty much every single one of the videos that, all the things that we've referenced and talked about here tonight, I have a Master System video, I have a Genesis video, I have a Saturn, I have a Dreamcast video. They're all uploaded on both Rumble and YouTube. Feel free to check those out and visit those. I may edit this to put links to those directly in the description for anybody watching the VOD, but those are all on my Rumble channel and my YouTube channel. So if you guys are interested in either one of those, by all means, check those out. That's the kind of content that I do best and that I'm the most passionate about. That's the kind of stuff that I would do all day, every day if I could. It's just what I enjoy doing. So
I love your videos.
That's the kind of stuff that I want to bring to both platforms. It is not the most popular content streaming is. So it may be that I have to set up some watch parties here and there to kind of get people used to the idea of what I'm trying to do. So that may be some streams that I'm trying to do in the near future as well, just to kind of get people used to the idea of, yeah, I do normal uploads and these are what they look like and this is what I'm trying to cover and, this is what I'm trying to bring to you guys because it's something I'm passionate about, I like learning about, and when I learn about it, I like to share it with other people, and they can share what they know with me, and I get to learn things, and you guys get to learn things. That's how I like to run things. So, anyway, I'm going to try to get us out of here. Thank you guys for spending time with us. If you haven't and you've been sitting here watching, please give the video a like. Please follow the channel. There's tons of content on here for you guys to check out. There'll be more content moving forward, and we look forward to seeing you guys again on the channel sometime soon.
By the way,
yes. Speak to me.
Look.
Oh, there we go. Oh, I have a monthly supporter. Oh my God. Original Next Level Games monthly supporter. That would be
I have been meaning to do that for 2 RetroRoots shows now, and I just keep forgetting because I'm just.
I don't even look for that because I have so many people that come in here, and you guys hanging out with me is just kind of like plenty. It's nice to have a supporter. I appreciate it.
Well, you were one of my first.
I think
5.
I was like your second, maybe your third.
I think you were my second.
It was pretty early on. I think somebody beat me to it before I could click on it. I love those little emojis. Those things are great. I gotta work on some of those.
I know. I love the
little
emojis.
jumping Mario. I just think he's too tiny. The Bumblebee I'm kind of happy with.
The Bumblebee is great, and the other one, of course.
The other one, of course, is too. I love the Grimlock one.
There you go.
The Grimlock makes me smile, and then the cat one is probably one of the best ones. I love the transforming Grimlock and the cat one. But I'm gonna go ahead and get us out of here, guys. Again, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us and spending time with us tonight. We always enjoy doing this show. It's one of the reasons that we keep it going, even if we don't always have a great topic, and sometimes we're just going, the heck with it, we're going to do it live. Because we've done that multiple times. Because it's more important to us to keep the schedule and to spend time with you guys than it is to honestly have the topic. We love to be prepared and have a topic. I desperately want to be more organized on this, and this is a step forward to me doing that, to bring you guys a better, more organized podcast. I still want to have shows where we're just like, you know what? Doing it live. We're just going to talk about whatever, because those are fun.
Right. Yes. I like to call those our Seinfeld episodes.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a show about nothing. This could be an episode.
Exactly.
This is an episode. So have a great evening, guys. Get some gaming in. Check out some of the videos and content that we have coming out. Check out other people in the chat. Synth Tracks, Greenhound Gaming, Hemp, all these people. Many of these people have fantastic channels. You deserve it. You deserve to treat yourself to checking out their channels.
Yeah. Greenhound, by the way, say congratulations to Greenhound. Greenhound, 100 videos on Rumble.
Fantastic. I don't think I have that many on Rumble yet. I've got more than that on YouTube. I've been at YouTube longer though, so I'm gonna start catching up because I start bringing some of the stuff over. But again, thank you guys so much. Have a fantastic rest of your evening. Come back and visit sometimes soon. Like, follow, check out the other channels, do all that other fun jazz. Happy gaming.